You have entered the realm of dead air. For the next 2 hours, you will be transported into the world of the strange and the supernatural. You might not feel the need to cleanse your laptops or mobile devices afterwards. But it might not be a bad idea.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our Sunday show. This is Dead Air Live on the Dead Air Full Spectrum channel, our Sunday night edition. Thank you guys for joining us and more joining us in here on the way. My name is George Lopez. With me, as always, Mr. Ken DaCosta. We are simulcast with KGRADB.com, KGRA on Facebook, and we thank you guys for joining us once again. And Ken, how are you faring up? No, we're on day 5 of straight rain in Florida, and then I saw the videos predominantly in New York. Did you get affected by any of this monsoon season or what?
Yeah, a little bit. Over the last 4 or 5 days, we're soaking it up like a sponge here.
Yeah. Is it affecting your gardening? Because I know you left a garden.
I do, and I think we're just about done, save for a couple of things tonight. We've got to run out and grab before they get flooded out. No, I mean, everything is good. You know, it's the autumn season. Hey, you know, it's still the growing season here. So, yeah, we got a lot of rain up here, but, you know, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. You'll never hear me complain until the first flake hits the ground. Yeah. Hello, everybody in chat. How are you?
Yeah,
if it's a little spotty on my end for Wi-Fi tonight, I apologize in advance. It's just kind of one of those nights. I assume that they've blown up the cable station after watching the Patriots tonight.
Part of that. The other part is the first floor of your house is underwater. That's another thing, too.
Correctamundo.
It's going to happen. Hey, a question about up north, too. We've got to get on with the show. A very, very good friend and one of our family here on Dead Air, Chris Blanchette, going to be joining us tonight, and we're going to talk about his new show, Paranormal Preservationist, and then we have Paranormal Perspectives and Paranormal Paradolia. I forget. We got a lot of paranormals on the show. Paranormal Couple. So we're going to have to start telling them they got to use other words.
Something, yeah.
So we can blend it in there. But I was watching this movie this weekend. I was just searching for weird stuff, and I found something called The Autopsy of Jane Doe. And, you know, the premise behind it is dealing with or around a witch. And very bizarre, very graphic. But one of the things they talked about is that this witch was originally buried in the Northeast, peat moss. And I guess that's indigenous only to the Northeast. They said that's where they would. You've heard about this before?
Sure. I live with it.
Yeah. If you notice the circles around my eyes, the last 3 nights, Ken hates when I talk about this. And I love Ken to death. You know, he's my partner on this show. We talk on the phone. We have a lot of different discussions about a lot of different things. But when I bring up my night terrors, he's too damn analytical. And he's breaking it down for me from a psychological and social perspective on it. I take all of his wisdom and, you know, try to rationalize in what I'm dealing with. But the last 3 nights, been one night after another, and these night terrors are starting to get redundant, Ken, in the sense of I can now tell which entity is trying to screw with my head. The first night was, and it's all of them, which is really strange, based in the home I grew up with in South Florida. Now, we moved from New Jersey when I was 13, but I lived there through my teens into adulthood. But I had a fire right outside the TV room, outside in the front of the driveway, ran out there. The fire led me around the side of the house where all of a sudden a huge giant serpent just stood up in the grass. And as I went to swing at it with all holy might, I woke up. The second night, I was in my childhood home and had seen what it was so real, Ken. I said in my dream, this is the first actual full body apparition. It was of a small child in the hallway near my bedroom. Coincidentally, when I talked about my original night terrors, it was the same area where that long-tailed serpent with the coat and the hat was located at too. And then back to the same old guy that keeps at me most of all, whatever this dark, sinister creature is. But I'm down the road from where I live in a house doing an investigation, and there's a cabinet that keeps opening up. That's a key. And you want to evaluate it. Maybe Chris, when he comes on, can evaluate it. But it is always the same routine of, can you open that? Can you move that? And this time it did. And I said, well, are you a good entity, a good spirit? And it wouldn't open. Are you a bad spirit? And it opened. And then that, I've talked about it with you, that foreboding feeling, that presence, that fight or flight thing appeared as far as the energy around me. And I woke up, and that was at 1:00 in the morning last night, and I couldn't go back to sleep for several hours. It just was so overbearing, so unbelievably strong. It really was. And again, I've presented this to you in our private phone calls, and you take a very much pragmatic, analytical approach to this from, well, when we have dreams and, these things that are weighing on our minds. My life couldn't be any more redundant right now. You and I talked about it, not much, but man, lately, it's just a bombardment. And when it happens that much, it's like having bad luck and then having bad luck right after that bad luck. And it's just, why me? That's the feeling that I'm going through right now,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes down to getting at the root of the problem, which is why I try to be as objective as I can, because at the point where you're starting to assign personalities and values to what comes to you, then it amounts to, an invitation at some point for that to permeate your dreams. So, I mean, to me, it's a matter of not introducing any more anxiety into the situation. Typically, if I didn't know you, you came to me with this, that would be the approach that I would take to try to take away some of that anxiety and try to stay as rooted in the real world as we possibly can, until that point that we're ready to kind of jump into, another realm, more a supernatural realm. So, it's what I would do in terms of helping somebody out who's going through, a burden like that. But,
Yeah.
I'm just afraid that, I am not a dream interpreter, by any stretch of the imagination. But there's got to be something rooted in the real world that, when those things, when you're in a beta state, when you're in a sleep state, that's when you're vulnerable to that.
Yeah. It's something that I now, God, it's got to be 4, 5, maybe 6 years that I've dealt with this now. That's been ongoing since my debacle at the Curse City House, and something I have to tend with. Never really was one to believe in it to that degree. Pragmatic like Ken is, but is there any way, Ken, you could just say it must be demons? I mean, it is a paranormal show,
I don't know. I'm not willing to go there yet.
All right.
We'll leave that up to Keith and Bishop Long and a few other people who know a little bit more about that.
You won't believe me until I'm floating 3 feet off the bed.
Yeah, you'll have me then for sure. Pictures or it didn't happen.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, guys. Also, Ken, ring that bell for me if you could, for reminders of upcoming content, and thumbs up if you guys are enjoying the topic in the show and our guests. And speaking of guests, we have a wonderful, wonderful guest and a new family member joining us tonight. And Ken, if you do the honors.
Sure. Our guest tonight is the host of a new Dead Air Full Spectrum show called the Paranormal Preservationist. His name is Chris Blanchette. He is one of the 5 original founding members of RISEUP Paranormal, and been with him for 15 years doing that, and probably another 10 or so coaching him in baseball, and went to school with his dad. And so we've known the Blanchette family for a long time. There is probably, in my mind, no finer researcher in this field than Chris. It's amazing the things that he comes up with, and willing to dig deeper and deeper into those things. His degree is in cultural and historic preservation, I believe, from Sale Regina University. And it was about time that we brought him on the show, because we talk about him and allude to him a lot. And we thought it would be nice, because he does have a show that's doing very well on the channel. He's got 2 episodes down, and some of the stories are maybe not suitable for younger viewers, but they deal with true crime and history and how that all transposes into the paranormal. So he does a great job bridging that gap. So without further ado, let's bring him on. Chris Blanchette is our guest tonight.
Thank you, Ken. Some great words there, talking me up a little bit.
Good
Yeah, sure. Why not?
I like it. You can keep going if you want.
Well, we're going to leave some of that to you tonight.
Oh, okay. All right.
I understand on Tuesdays, though, you're going to have an opening show prior to yours called the Paranormal Protagonist. Is that correct?
I don't know. Is it in production?
We're going to keep adding them. That's all there is to it.
Just
Monopoly, baby. That's the
a lot
game.
of keywords.
How you doing, first of all? How's everything going?
Doing very well. Staying dry. Trying not to cry over the Patriots this year, but it's all right.
Please, at least you had your heyday, okay?
Yeah.
I'm a Dolphin fan.
You had last week.
I had one day in 45 years.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I'm sure at that point in time, Dan Marino was just quaking in his boots, He's not going to get that record anymore. But thanks for joining us tonight. And, kind of, first of all, I want to do it now. With Ken's permission, and of course, towards the end of the show, also tell everybody about this new show and how it came to fruition. How you decided that this was the direction you wanted to go with this show on Tuesday nights.
Well, I really think it's just a culmination of a lot of time researching. I mean, I have so many case files and research files, and we started writing some down at one point, and I think it was just time to kind of do like a podcasty type show where I could show the evidence and really bring up a lot of the questions that have been bothering me, kind of sitting behind the scenes. I'm the guy behind the soundboard a lot of times. But I just, these questions were burning me. Like, what is the role of a preservationist or a historian in the paranormal world? And is there some movement that should happen here where the shift should be balanced? There should be a little bit of history and the paranormal, what's driving our investigations, really.
To the degree of the activity in a location, do you support the theory that this is an important part of that investigation? Some people like to go in cold, but does it give you some more fire, some more ammunition for you or for the team that's going in to try and make connections with those spirits?
Oh, yes. I have ammunition is a good way to put it. So many times we go into these locations prepared to ask these questions. I'm thinking of Maplecroft with Lizzie Borden, and how we didn't talk about the murders. I mean, you can imagine how many times that's been brought up. And we had some ammunition about her having an argument with the next door neighbor about a fence. And sure enough, we got an EVP during that questioning, because I feel like if you're bringing the things that they experienced and the information that they're familiar with, you're more likely to get some kind of paranormal activity or evidence. Goes along with playing music of the time period, right? We're trying to set the stage to make whatever entity or whatever's there familiar with the stories, you know?
Yeah, I think it gives us a different direction to go in and kind of work outside the box, break the mold a little bit. And it's a good example when we were at the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast and Maplecroft, we made a conscious decision that we were going to explore the different facets of her life rather than go in there and, you know, the basic questions, you know, try to get a confession out of her and find out what happened. That has been done to death, no pun intended. So we thought it would be good to have Chris, you know, and some of this is public knowledge, and some of the other elements you can dig a little deeper. But what did she like to do? We found out she loved animals. She was very active in the church. So we emphasized those things, if nothing else, to present ourselves as we care a little bit more about that right now. So we're not going to burden you anymore with the typical questions that everybody asks, you know, the sensationalist stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has resulted in some head scratching moments where we definitely can explain some evidence, you know?
Yeah, no, it really did. And it works to our benefit, because if you're trying to build a relationship with a property or with the spirits who might still remain there, I think it behooves you to know something a little bit more about their life than the typical, are you a man or a woman? Did you die in this place? And, you know, the rest of it. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about what that's like to come in armed with information when you're going into these places, and how you can cut through a lot of the supernatural red tape that you got to go through in the introduction process, when you can come in with information and background and just get right to the point.
Yeah. I think, you know, I find it's my responsibility to do that for the location. You know, coming into a location and allowing yourself not to be ready is like going and playing a sport without the directions. I always felt like, so I felt like it was my role to make sure that when we stepped in these locations, we're familiar with it. We know the people that were there. We know all the events that perhaps the tragedies, or even the positives, you know. So when we step foot into these locations, I really feel like, you know, I'm already part of that location. I know when it was constructed, everyone who's lived there, because a lot of times we're trying to, who's here, and you're trying to get that EVP, who's here, where we can actually just start naming people, and we can jump into these conversations like we're actually in the room with some of these people. And, you know, I always felt that that was my role, to give that to you, to give that to my team, and be prepared.
Well, I think if you walk into a place and there was someone who named William, who was the patriarch, if you're able to walk in and say, William, you know, introduce yourself. How are Tom, Abigail, and Billy Jr., your son? You know, and I think that goes a long way toward grabbing somebody like and letting them know that, you know, we've prepared ourselves, we've done our homework, and we care a little bit more about them as people than we do just objects of our attention.
Yeah.
And getting them to do tricks for us.
Yeah. Or even I feel like if we could shock them with information, maybe they would present us with some material. I was thinking about the case you just gave me for the private residence in Fall River. And it took me a while to find out the name of the boat that the captain sank on.
Right.
I always thought that, hey, that was going to be a great thing to throw out during the investigation, because like no one knows this boat. It took a lot of looking through different ship manifests and stuff like that to find the name of this boat. So being able to say, do you remember, or we're sorry for your loss, that he sank on this ship or something like
Right.
that, perhaps shock whatever entity's there to be like, oh my God, you remember the name of the ship,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was in that particular case, it was a bit of a challenge because they insisted there was nothing about the house to be found. And I said, well, just give us a shot. Well, good luck with that. No. We know a guy. Just give us a shot. And so everybody knows when, we do go to someone's house or maybe any property, Chris prepares a dossier with everything: plat maps, death certificates, census records, and whatever stories he can find. And we usually present that to the owner for themselves, a little bit of file on their property. But I wanted to ask, because this happens once in a while, how do you feel when the facts don't line up with a story? Because we get that a lot, this happened and that happened, and then the facts belie that.
Yeah.
And now it's a different approach,
Yeah, I'm hoping actually to do an episode on like the relationship between a historian and a psychic, because that always can be very frustrating, because you get these narratives developed off of paranormal evidence that aren't aligning with the historic narrative, and it would be very easy to just shut them off, and I don't. It actually drives me to dig deeper into the research, to think maybe outside the box, broaden the span. If you watch episode 2, really that's an example of this evidence of a woman in a Revolutionary War readout. It just didn't make sense. So then let's expand the research and go a little bit further and further out. And a lot of times, I surprise myself. Maybe I surprise other people, I hope, making some connections. But there's still some times where there's absolutely no connection. And I actually still have a folder of a lot of those where like every once in a while I'll go back and be like, is there a new database I can look into?
Right.
But I'll never shut anyone's narrative that doesn't align with mine off. I just feel like it's going to drive me to look deeper and deeper. And I think it's more rewarding when we do find those connections. Another one, and I think it was Tiffany, when we were at the Middleborough town hall, she mentioned a hanging. And if you see the video, I probably at that point, my eyes roll. Yeah, there it is. I think I might roll my eyes like, hanging. There's no hanging there. But, I went home and I read through a lot of newspapers, too many newspapers. And I actually did find an account of a boy who hung himself not too far in the same block, the park that's kind of part of it. So again, left me scratching my head, so I never give up. And you probably know that. I mean, you give me a case, I'm going to stay with it and try to unlock everything that I can find.
Well, for the longest time, and Chris, we never employed psychics. We certainly welcomed some along, with the idea that we weren't going to go out of our way to embarrass anybody or prove them wrong, because the best psychics will tell you they're not right all the time. We're not right all the time. So as long as we accept that, it's a good working environment. But for the longest time, I had a lot of people, I'm a psychic, I want to join RISEUP. That was, the way in. And to me, it was just kind of like, well, we just come at it from a little different perspective. And, you're welcome to do that as long as you agree that whatever we get, we're going to be putting it to the test, so to speak. And again, it's not an intentional thing to make anybody feel bad, but it's just like when a homeowner tells us a story and maybe it's been handed down, that story grows and grows and grows. Eventually, somewhere in the middle, there's got to be the truth. So we're always looking for that middle, and sometimes those facts may be in contrast with someone's story or a psychic impression or anything like that. And we've never felt we've had to apologize for it because we've been wrong about things. Everybody's wrong about things. So we all work together to kind of, get to the element of, well, why is this place haunted? I mean, you got to go back. So it kind of leads me to another question. Do you believe, in years of researching this, that the history of a property can potentially trigger a paranormal event there?
That's a tough one. We've looked at so many historical events and locations. We've had the pleasure of pretty much hitting most of the major historical landmarks around this area and being able to investigate them. And
here's one right here. One
of
your favorites.
Belcourt's a great example. Coming into Belcourt, that the history I think is definitely locked into these places when we're talking about like residual evidence. I mean, so many times we hear, the music in this great ballroom, the Gothic style ballroom. You hear the footsteps on the stairs, and you're thinking about, the Chase Corey House built in 1620. I mean, how many times did people go up and down those stairs? Or the Oliver House. I mean, all of these places have witnessed so many emotions and so many deaths, that I really think it is locked in residually. If we're going to talk about, intelligent hauntings, I mean, that's still a question that I'm trying to figure out whether, does the event, the major events, does that mean there's more intelligent hauntings? I don't know. But I think the major events probably lead to a lot more residual hauntings. It just
I think
emotions,
I think that we do leave an imprint in some form or another in the ether itself. And I think that, it beginning, we were probably, I don't know. We started in 2007 as a group, and unbelievable, that's 15 years ago.
Going up to Cape Cod for the lectures.
Right. But about 2 or 3 years into it, we were at Belcourt.
Yeah.
And, we were still going through this stuff as a group, the idea of haunted objects and people who collected things. And Donald Tinney did a lot of stained glass, and he was a collector, antique stores, antique shows, auctions. And it was just a collection of all these artifacts, Napoleon's tea set, mummy wrappings, suits of armor. And every one of those things had a story. We remember sitting in the chairs, you'd get thrown out. Yeah, spoiler alert, we didn't.
No. But they were great salt chairs. They were really interesting.
Yeah. But the salt chairs in and of itself, when we found out what they were, was amazing.
Yeah.
Just to know that, like, what is a salt chair? The suits of armor that screamed, another spoiler alert, none of them screamed.
No, I love I'll have Mr. Tinney.
There were dozens of other things that did happen in there that had nothing to do with the ghost stories that had been around there for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah. It's the only place where I had to lock up at night. It was the only place that I locked up in a hurry because it always had that feeling. No other place has given me that feeling of like, I think I should shut the windows and lock up a little quick today.
Yeah. It had that vibe to it. And spending the year there that we did and being able to go in all the nooks and crannies of this place, we probably wouldn't recognize it today.
No.
But that was more, we've been able to go into different eras, especially here in the Northeast, we're pretty lucky. You get so many things attached to this. So I guess it's an example of why the history is so important to this, because I mean, we're in the seat of it where we happen to live.
Plus, I mean, these places want you to value that history. Getting into those locations weren't because we had a great pedagogy when it came to how we did our paranormal investigations, which was partly so. We had our approach is very, we're not screaming and yelling, but going in knowing the history and dealing with like the Royal Arts Foundation with Belcourt, these places want to know that you are going to respect the history of the location. So, I mean, I think it's something that you built that reputation very early on with our mission statement, and it's been a good ride.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there
there she goes. Well, we came out of the gate with that because I think when we figured, all right, let's go talk to these people, let's see these places. I think we established a mindset like, what are we going to do that's different? So I think right out of the gate, we said that historic research and knowledge and learning about this stuff was going to be important to us. We weren't going to.
There she goes again.
Footsteps.
I
saw no one behind. But that's kind of the way, and I don't think we've veered from that very often, even though the paranormal world is spinning around us. It's still important. Yeah. But I want to talk a little bit about that because we have both met with boards. We have met with owners. And when we're interested in doing this, and a lot of times we do it to benefit the place.
Yeah.
It's not just a curiosity because we've got a history of that. And I think we know what we're doing. And we try to give people recommendations from other places because money's hard to come by now for historic locations. But wanted to talk a little bit about that process when you're approaching somebody saying, okay, look, here we are. And, we're not the Ghostbusters. I want to apologize again for everybody. If things are freezing up, it's probably on my end, so not much I can do about it. But that is an art unto itself. I mean, so many people get so upset that places close their doors now. Like, we don't want to do the paranormal anymore. And people lose their minds over it. And you have to understand that. Not everybody's on board with this. It belongs to them and they're stewards of the place. So that's a whole different thing when you're trying to get into a place and not come across with the preconceived notion of people have of who we are and what we do.
Yeah. I can use Belcourt and Fort Adams as an example with that, definitely, because Fort Adams was not initially a paranormal opportunity for us. I had to spend a lot of time just dealing with the Royal Arts Foundation, even though Mrs. Tinney owned it and was running her own ghost tours. There was a need for some new excitement at Belcourt. So I had to sit in a lot of meetings and explain to them that we were going to be stewards of their history, but also try to explore it in a different fashion, an unconventional fashion. And, it took a while. And even, getting into Fort Adams, I know you did a lot of the conversations early on with them. It was about how we were going to approach keeping that history of the even though they did the tunnels that were really ridiculous, but getting into the actual fort itself, they were very, we didn't want anything over theatric.
Right. As they put on the Fortress of Nightmares where they jumped out at people.
they had a little dichotomy problem,
Yeah, you wanted it both ways. But I mean, that's the thing. Grants and things like that, they've kind of dried up.
Absolutely.
And if you are looking for an historical designation, on the National Register, it sounds like a cool thing, and it is, to have that kind of designation, but with it comes an awful lot of caveats, don't they?
Yeah, there's a big identity crisis when you're trying to balance. Am I going to be on the National Registry? I mean, I've done a lot of research for the Conjuring House, and they have a little bit of identity crisis because they're a great historic museum, but they're caught in a very paranormal themed world. So there's nothing that could make them qualified for the historic registry unless they were willing to kind of push back a little bit and be more of a historic house museum that offers paranormal, I guess, paranormal visits, or they just kind of lost that historic designation in a way as a location because of their focus. So it's a struggle, and then there really is no incentive. They're not going to get any big grants, like you said. They've washed up.
But they also sit on your neck in terms of how you want to, redo leaky windows or doors or something like that. They have to be custom made. They have to match that era. It's not just like going out and getting Anderson windows.
No, it's not cheap. It's not cheap.
Yeah. Now, Lizzie Borden House does not have a designation, does it?
I don't think so. I know.
I don't think so either, right? And that follows along with what you're saying. Like, what historical significance did it have there? I know everybody's going to roll their eyes, say, "What are you, nuts?" It's like a murder or something. I mean, they'd be putting plaques on the Amityville house if that was the case.
They're looking for, is it a unique architectural feature that's unique to the area? Is it like some kind of very unique architecture? Was there an architect that was very famous? Did a famous person live there? Is it an archaeological gem? Like, is this a place that we could discover, new insight into the life of the 1600s? And unfortunately, like a Lizzie Borden house, that tenement house doesn't fall into a lot of those categories. You could argue the murder as like a social history thing, but it would be a tough argument.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of towns have particular areas declared that may include a couple of stores and 5 houses, a church.
Yeah, the district.
I think Falmouth, Massachusetts, down the Cape, has one of those designations in the town square where everything included in it is on the National Register. But again, I know Chris has had a lot of people ask about their particular properties, Conjuring House being one under a couple of different owners. It's not as easy as something significant happened there. You'd have to define significance.
You would. It had to be very unique. And the Conjuring House actually probably would fall under that, being, this unique farmhouse that's kind of trapped in the modern day. You could probably make an argument there. But like I said, they have a little bit of an identity crisis, which would be hard to justify in your write-up. Please ignore all the paranormal stuff,
Right. When you go down these rabbit holes for research, and I know because, I kind of live it with you, but when you start digging about a certain property or a certain property owner, and you have a very finite search, and then all of a sudden you start branching out and you find out things about the neighborhood, the town, the city, and it takes you into so many different directions that may or may not lead back to where you originally started. But it's incredible what you can learn about an entire town.
Yeah. Are you referencing Connecticut?
I'm referencing a lot of things, to be honest. Yeah, Connecticut. We don't want to even get into it because I know Chris will probably do an episode on it.
But
no spoilers here, but
no.
When you hear, and if he does, some of the stories, I think it began with a church,
Yeah.
And then this particular town in Connecticut just had some of the most bizarre things happening there to their residents. Kind of crazy. It was sort of like Harrisville, Rhode Island, where the Conjuring House is, where you found out that the sport of choice over a decade was walking into a pond and drowning yourself.
Yeah, I know.
This was
A
the
recurring
means.
theme. Yeah. Yeah.
This was apparently a thing there.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to stay focused sometimes. And it's not always a bad thing to expand your research, but I have to remind myself, like, stay focused, clean up the actual location first before I branch out. Because not every research project leads to anything. There's probably more often than not, especially with, residential homes, and that I'm just sorry, Ken, I have names, but there really isn't anything that's gonna stick out as tragedy. Most people live a life that's not going to be documented, and it's one of the struggles of public history, is like, how do we represent that voice when that voice is left out in so many documents and whatever you're trying to research with. Then I branch out, and someone asked if I'd do an episode of The Conjuring House. I will be, eventually. But that's another example of branching out. I found the person who dug up a 7-foot body supposedly in their basement, and it turns out the father of that is actually Edwin's father-in-law, who went over there as a doctor. So there's all these connections,
right?
And especially the towns, the further you go back, there's always some connections. The town of Connecticut's not a surprise. It's a very small town. There's a lot of connections. So
sure.
You give me these, and sometimes I'm staring there and going off and like, oh, got to come back, because I can go on for a while sometimes. And then I get yelled at by my wife because I'm sitting there reading newspapers for a few days.
No, who the hell doesn't?
I know, right?
When you hit
something worse.
Well, when you hit 40 years like I do, they can't wait to get rid of you. So it's a whole different thing. I want to bring George back in here as we come up to the top of the hour. The last question I had for you is, now that you've done this and we all start, like, you guys know that I was into this for years, and you guys came along and we started a group from scratch. What do you think now, after 15 years of doing this, is the most essential quality that a paranormal investigator can have?
Wow, that's a good one. Humility. I mean, you got to be very willing to not catch paranormal activity. Being a paranormal investigator, you have to be willing to just, no, it's not, and peel back the theatrics. You have to be willing to do that, and I think is a great characteristic, because then your evidence is even more meaningful. When you're just a little humble, and not so theatrical. I think those are great qualities, because then, I mean, even with homeowners and boards and presidents of historical societies, they're not looking for those theatrics and either. They want, if you're going to come in there, they're going to want you to have an approach that's at least based in some narratives that can be real. So I think that's a good quality.
And I just want to say, George, in the places we've done, and some of them still exist today, obviously, Paint House Museum at the top of that list. We've been there for 11 years, but in every place we've gone to, even if our presence there has only lasted 2 or 3 years, one of the things I insist on as the director is we have autonomy over who goes in there. Now, I know that people will, I'm not trying to make it sound worse than what it is, but if we're doing events there, we are not denying anyone the right to go in there. What I'm asking is, if they get a request that doesn't go through us, to please contact us because we probably know the people, we know the group. And there have probably been, on less than one hand, the amount of times where I've ever said, I don't know, maybe you don't want them in there. They're screaming demon all the time. And, I don't think they're going to represent your location the right way. They'll probably put it on social media and play it up. So a lot of people look at that as territorial. I never looked at it like we're being territorial. You're absolutely welcome. They're not ours to give away, but I've always wanted to be consulted on them because I think that's part of our responsibility. So,
Sure. Well, same kind of thing we had to deal with, I told you the story with Curse City. We were going there before nobody even discovered the location. And then, unfortunately, there were some people in there showing absolute disrespect for the property. And all of a sudden, the activity turned dark very, very, very fast. Whether it was a manifestation that they brought in with them or created while they were there or woke something up. So, yeah, it's critically important to screen who's going to be at that particular location. Our very special guest tonight, the host of the new Dead Air Full Spectrum show on Tuesday nights, Paranormal Preservationist, Mr. Chris Blanchette. And did you change your last name because of your fascination for Ouija boards?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I've only used one once, and it's in an episode of the Lizzie Borden House. I think someone referenced it before, me and Cody. But no, it's French. I believe it needs something about a white horse or something like that.
I wouldn't be surprised, though, that meeting people in this field and they hear that last name and they think it starts with a P instead of a B and ask you that question. Has that happened?
A few times, believe it or not. The P just keeps coming back up in the paranormal. It's just,
without question. Let's talk about the research that you do and how you apply it in the form of an investigation, gathering this evidence. And one of the questions that I would have for you, if I was in your area after I went to the Conjuring House, then I would come to you and say, okay, Chris, you're going to be going to X location, fully armed to the teeth with the background, the history of this area. Does it benefit or behoove you to have a cold investigator come in, somebody who's going in blind, as almost a comparison? You know that the homeowner was named William and his wife was named Abby, and you have all that information at your beckoning call. And all of a sudden, somebody going in cold gets EVPs, or they're doing some sort of automatic writing, something of that sort. Does that help reinforce things of what you're hoping to combine between the paranormal and history?
Yeah, because I think so. If we're just talking of a standard investigator with no ability of psychic ability or anything like that,
right?
And they're not willing, they'll all give the information to and stuff like that. But if there's psychics or people doing automatic writing or drawing or anything like that, I try not to, and it's not because I want to catch them. And I'm actually, it's kind of going to be in the next episode about this relationship between historians and psychics. I'm not trying to catch you. It's just I am in the field to answer what's going on too. I do want to understand the paranormal too. So for me, if I'm loaded with that background information and I'm not going to give it to you, it's not because I'm trying to trick you. It's because I'm more willing to say, well, let's see what you get. Because if you get something, then I'm going to feel even more validated in the paranormal side. Because, I think people forget that, I love history, but I'm also in this for the paranormal. So I think not giving it out in all the circumstances is a way that I could also control what I'm getting about the paranormal world.
Well, there's an unproven theory, and I want your take on that theory. I'm sure you've heard it, as many have. As a matter of fact, we talked about this on several occasions with Barry Fitzgerald over the years, and that is the self-manifestation of entities. There was an experiment that a group had done, I think it was in Texas, and they told a story, completely made up the character, completely made up the name, and people began getting EVPs of this particular individual. And so, again, you wonder if you're providing every single investigator every morsel of detail, if that is a potential occurrence during an investigation, well, it kind of taints it in a sense. But if somebody going in without any of that background information and still gets that, they've not manifested anything. It's pretty much at that point, unless you're right there present with them, you may have manifested it also. Are you a subscriber to that potential possibility happening in a haunting?
I don't know. I believe there was I believe it started out of Canada too. I think there was a case in Canada where they created this entity, and reading about it, there was some bias in the research and stuff. So I don't know how much I subscribe to that. It's a tough one for me that we are projecting a manifestation based off of just us collectively agreeing that this is John Smith. I have a hard time believing that one. Maybe it's my researcher side. Like I just like, these are the people that lived here. We should be expecting it. I've never tried to just make up an historical figure and feed it to everybody and then see if we're going to get results from that person. But there's a lot that, I step back on. That's one of them. Some of the tools and stuff that are just spitting out names and stuff. I have a hard time.
Right.
It's just my researcher side. Like I know the documents. I know. So that's a tough one for me. I read the case, but I think it was out of Canada.
From the paranormal aspect of what you do, then, do you have any aspect of what an investigator brings to the investigation that you wholeheartedly believe in? If it's not the spirit boxes and the SB7s and the echo boxes and everything else that's out there right now, what particular type of investigation equipment do you subscribe to? Do you think is actually helping to validate a case?
I like equipment that is grounded in other applications that you could really tear apart and say that this EVP, that this is recording audio, that this is, and that when you tear apart a lot of those other boxes, there's a lot of programming bias, and there's a lot of people speculating on both sides, and it's made for a purpose, and that purpose is to collect paranormal evidence. And so a lot of those devices I'm very kind of pushed back on, but things that are monitoring the environment, electrical environment, energy, things that are, grounded in some kind of other application besides being produced for the paranormal. I like those cameras, right, things like that, if it's on that, there is no bias in the equipment. That equipment is not a paranormal tool because it wasn't produced for the paranormal world.
One more question before we go to break is, and for you guys that have questions for our guest tonight, don't forget, get it in that chat, and we'll visit those questions in the second hour. As a paranormal preservationist, a person who does research from the aspect of history, do you ever, or would you ever, include the claims of a haunting? In other words, something that people have said over the centuries, this is what tends to happen. And again, would you present that to an investigative group going in, even your own investigative group, or would you still leave it for someone to discover for their own to see whether or not it validates these claims?
I like to front load information, especially like, here's the claims at this location. I'm not against it. It drives my research, those claims. It's something that I feel prepares you to know where things happened and what happened. Maybe if we're doing public events, we don't so much, at the Payne House, we're not going to go through the whole entire history of the house and stuff like that with every group. But I do think understanding the claims can help you focus your investigation.
even in those circumstances that, and I said I wanted to hold off on this question till the other side of the break. Ken, if you want to come back on with us. But again, the basis of what you're going to be doing on Tuesdays is more so of telling stories or also bringing to light these particular locations for your viewers, should they decide that these are the locations that they'd like to investigate in the future, their bucket list.
Yes, I don't, if people want to invest, and not all of them are places to investigate. A lot of them are just stories. Like the last two, where there really isn't a location. I really just want to present the stories. Are there going to be episodes that like this is a location? Absolutely. But I think my main purpose is to tell the story, but also maybe get you to think about, relationships between historians and psychics, relationships between, should every group do the history, or I want you to get these thoughts as you're watching the episode. So maybe a little thought evoking, maybe a little storytelling. I hope it's a little bit both, a little entertaining.
Well, we're excited. For I understand you're going to be doing 22 episodes. Is that correct?
I believe you guys are only paying me for 10, but we can talk contracts later.
Not a problem. Bill, our producer, is independently wealthy, so we'll see with that. Not to mention Powerball's what, $1 billion, so we'll see. But we got to go to break here, guys. On the other side, we'll be continuing our conversation. Don't forget, put your questions in the chat. Don't forget to hit that reminder bell and that thumbs up. We're going to get a quick break in about 3 minutes. On the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Chris Blanchette. You are watching Dead Air Live on the Dead Air Full Spectrum channel. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
As UFO reports come in from around the world, the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, is there. We continue to explore new cases and build our massive database. We share our information with the world in a number of ways. If you would like to be part of our investigative team, you are always welcome. What could be more exciting than exploring the UFO question firsthand? Join MUFON, find your friends.
Did you know 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated? If you struggle with focus, run low on energy, or when it's time to finally sleep, you simply can't, this can all be linked to dehydration, and Fuel Up has the answer. Our proprietary formula contains the finest cellular hydration with the strongest immune-enhancing natural ingredients. The Fuel Up system is made up of 3 different incredibly tasting varieties. Wake kickstarts your day with a jolt of caffeine. Play boosts focus while hydrating your cells. Rest not only helps you relax, but also rejuvenates your cells while you sleep. Here's what our clients have to say.
I really don't miss my coffee, and you can tell the difference.
So I'm going to take it for the energy. I'm going to take it for the play. I'm going to take it, all day.
And it works. That's the thing. It works. We love it.
Take the Fuel Up Challenge now, where we offer a Feel the Difference money-back guarantee. Fuel Up for life.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
That's right, guys. Don't forget to check out kgradb.com for all of its tremendous content. And welcome back to our show in the second hour with a very special guest, Chris Blanchette. As before we move forward on that, as we said, it's important to hit that reminder bell for all of the content here on Dead Air Full Spectrum, including Chris's new show on Tuesdays. But we're not done, are we, Ken?
No, we have on October 13th, Secrets of the Craft. We've been talking about it for months now, and it is ready to go. Melissa St. Hilaire will be taking you through the greater Los Angeles area. Her first visit will be an emporium in North Hollywood, where she's going to introduce us to some of the practitioners of the craft, and you get to know a little bit about them as people, maybe dispel some myths, and it promises to be funny and poignant and entertaining and all of those things. So make sure you tune in for that. That is Friday night, of course, October 13th. Only here on Dead Air Full Spectrum.
And you will absolutely get a chance. They will teach you how to perform curses on people you don't like. So it'll be an interesting 2024.
Right in the first episode, you will learn how to cast magic.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that mean it's a lot smaller after that episode, or?
Yeah, exactly. Beetlejuice, one shrinking head. No, I am thrilled to get a chance to talk with you again, Chris. Always fascinating. I have only one question, of course, and I want to go back to Ken before we get to our questions in chat. Make sure you guys put those questions in there for us. You heard at the top of the show me speaking somewhat of demonic forces, and I am a huge proponent to the idea that the time frame that mostly these historical buildings that you're looking at was shrouded in heavy Christianity. And do you believe, because nothing of what you've said or talked to us about really falls into that category of the big D, the demonic. Do you suspect more so that these locations where you've gone through the history and there may have been trauma there, there's certainly going to be deaths, no question about it, whether it be tuberculosis or war, but it really doesn't fall under that category of satanic worship by any means, and yet you could go to these locations and the people who own it, the people who run it, will bring in that dark, sinister mood to a group of investigators going in. Would you really think that these demons are just popping up and, anywhere they can to start tormenting investigators? Or would you say that those who were very much immersed in Christianity during that time, especially around the turn of the century, kind of manifested this themselves or created this themselves out of a sense of guilt or remorse or something that some sort of emotional imprint created these entities?
I don't know. It's a tough question for me because, religious research is a very different type of research. Religious, especially in this area, we have such a wide range in this area of different types of religion, and I'm always nervous about religious bias and buy-in, and the demon question has come up, and people have asked me this question. I've kind of tiptoed around it because for me, I need to see the research, and even historically with religions, when you look at their research and then their beliefs in demonic presences and all this stuff, it's very all over the place, and especially in this area with the types of religions coming over.
Well,
And
Ken has eloquently talked about how Christianity kind of stole from different mythology and different religions over the centuries. And, you know, in the aspect of Christianity and most religions for that aspect of it, there's a heaven, there's a hell, there's a God, and there's a devil. So sins that they have done on earth are the reasons why sometimes they stay in purgatory. They're still at that location. Others because they don't want to leave this earth. They love their loved ones, they miss their loved ones, but it still seems to be something that our history is just completely immersed in. We're dealing with that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, but then you have Hinduism, and we're talking about reincarnation and rebirth, and they don't really have a heaven and hell. They just have a goal to meet Brahma in the end.
Sure.
So mythology is tough, because when you're mixing mythology with history, you have to look into how much mythology was created to control a group of people in order to get obedience.
I mean, like burn witches.
Yeah, I mean, and that all stems from a king and these people that are writing the Hammer of the Witches and all this stuff, right? So you can now look back and say, well, that was just created by just a normal guy that just started interpreting things in a certain way, So, I'm big on bias, and it's a big thing in public history. It's a big thing in historic research about identifying biases and where things are coming from. So the demons part in researching it and trying to figure out where did it come from, because I've been on plenty of investigations where there's supposedly demonic presences and haven't experienced any of it. Now, I don't ever want to discredit anyone's experiences, because obviously those stories are their stories and their experiences. I would never discredit those, but I've never experienced them. So I don't know. I don't want to jump to a conclusion until I have enough to say that they exist or they don't, or where does that fall in my research. I'm not willing to count it out, but I am going to question it. And I think that's always important, is to question it, because, historically there have been horrible people, and they could still be at some of these locations if we're believing that the paranormal exists. So is it just a horrible person that's manifesting itself, or is it actually a demon? And I know it's
an important distinction, though, isn't it?
Yes. One is believing in like a lot of historical narratives and historic stories, and the other one is breaking into a realm of mythology and non-living life forms. It's a jump, and it's a hard one for me, but I'm not willing to discredit it. I'm willing to research it and try to experience it or not experience it. If it's real, I'd rather not experience it, but at least be able to approach it in a very pragmatic, unbiased way. When one person told me, and this always set me in a weird direction, because one person told me, well, you don't experience it because you're not very Christian. And then I said to myself, wait a minute, so the most evil things in the world, all you have to do to not experience them is not to be a Christian. That didn't seem to make sense to me. So I'm trying to put all this together to figure out, what is actually going on.
Amen. Mr. DaCosta.
Yes, sir. I think when you get into this gig and do it for a while, you're always going to get the demonic questions, because they're part of the narrative when it comes to these things. We're going to get to questions in a second, but the last episode of Paranormal Preservationist, you played an EVP on there, and I wanted to revisit that because sometimes we can connect dots, and sometimes they lead us in the right direction, and sometimes they're speculative. They're pretty subjective. But one of the places was Fort Barton, and it's not a fort in the traditional sense. It was more of a staging ground for troops during the Battle of Rhode Island. But it's right here in Tiverton, and that observation tower overlooks the Seconic River, Mount Hope Bay. It's an absolutely gorgeous place. But a number of years ago, and I will let you set this up right now, Chris. You talked a little bit about this on an episode, but before I play it, let everybody know what the deal was, why you were there, and what they're going to hear right now.
Yeah, I mean, this was very early Rise Up, and we were looking for locations, and we said, we have this place in town. We got some permissions to kind of go up at night, and me and Dave, Ken's son, went up one night, and we wanted to explore. And there's a cemetery not too far from where we were. Like Ken said, it was a staging area. It's actually a staging area for General Prescott when he went out and kidnapped the British general out in Newport with his rowboats and stuff. So it was a really cool historic place. We weren't expecting to get anything. We were hoping to. So our line of questionings went in a million different ways. And I got to the point where it says, okay, we know you're here, but obviously you're not active. Are you scared? And then that leads into the EVP. And then after that, you hear Dave say, did you know General Prescott? So we definitely didn't hear it at the time. And it's only me and Dave in the middle of a field with lots of crickets. Probably 1, 2, 3 in the morning. It was pretty late at this time. It was like the end.
Right.
So that leads into an EVP that I don't think we talk about enough, because this one was, it was a good one.
It was a good one, and I took the liberty I took the crickets out because they were obnoxious. But this is what happened, and you'll hear Chris, of course, the last word of the sentence, are you scared? And then you're going to hear a voice that shouldn't be there before you hear Dave's. So here it is for you.
Scared. Do you know General Prescott?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I'm going to play that one more time for you, listening and watching us tonight. And you tell me what you think the female voice says. So here it is again.
Scared. Do you know General Prescott?
Now, I'll tell you what we think it says. We think she's saying he's got it, which may or may not be in context to the statement Chris made as far as in terms of her being scared. And it's also important to note that they were there because there has long been stories, and you'll have to watch the second episode of the Paranormal Preservationist if you want to hear the whole story. It's less than 20 minutes long, but exactly why they were there. But there's a long history of stories related to the paranormal surrounding Fort Barton and that area. But one of the things that we did is, if we're right and it says he's got it, she is using a contraction. He's. So that can kind of put us at a certain era. I don't know if they were using contractions during the Revolutionary War, or this is a female maybe from the late 1800s, early 1900s, where contractions were kind of common. But this is the type of thing that you got to pick apart when you're trying to judge who this might be and from what time frame.
Yeah, and you would understand that a woman wouldn't be at those readouts. I mean, it wasn't an area that would have been very active with women at that time as a staging area. You'd have to kind of dive into the history of what was it after the Revolutionary War, which it kind of just laid there. There really wasn't much going on. So it was a head scratcher for sure.
Yeah. It was one of those things that everything goes out the window because no one's kicking a chair. No one's in another room. This is outdoors.
Yeah.
Two guys sitting there in the wee hours of the morning and have female voice come in. That remains to me, and that's something, when I do presentations and we're playing evidence, that's one of the ones I always come back to. And that's stayed with me because of basically all the things it couldn't be.
Yeah, the context.
Yeah. Let me ask you another question here. In terms of strictly talking about our investigations, to this point, who is your favorite in terms of maybe most intriguing or more interesting figure in history that I've asked you to research or we had to before we went to a place? Can you pick one? I know we have been to just about 40 places on the National Register. I'm not going to give you the roster right now. We've been pretty lucky, but is there one figure that you've had to research that stands out?
Oh, there's so many. I don't know. I mean, because Belcourt and the whole social history, I mean, all that stuff is awesome. The Oliver House was an interesting one because of being able to kind of like downplay they really played up the Benjamin Franklin story. So it was nice to research that and kind of like bring that down. And there were some children involved. One of my focuses in my research, I'm almost done with my master's right now, is adolescents in the colonial period. So anytime we're dealing with like children and stuff like that, that always interests me. So I don't know if I could answer that one. We've had so many.
Well, there's been Lizzie Borden. There's been Franklin. There's been
even the Nathaniel Green homestead. Nathaniel Green was
Nathaniel Green. Yeah,
that was a good one. Smith's Castle. Smith's Castle was an interesting one because there was a lot going on at Smith's Castle, and there were some great stories that came out of that one.
Did you know that? I heard this the other day that Smith's Castle, and so what we're talking. We were doing public events there for like maybe 3 years, and frankly, we left because I was just tired of getting home at 2:00 in the morning because it's a bit of a drive, but it's a wonderful place. But this is a place where a lot of hostilities took place between colonial settlers and the various indigenous peoples that were there. At one point they got along and then they didn't, as those things go. But there was a sympathizer. It's in Narragansett. Was it Narragansett?
I think it was Narragansett, that area.
Okay. So this was Joshua Teft, who was convicted of being a sympathizer and was drawn and quartered on the grounds. The only that I'm aware of in our research, the only person that happened to on American soil.
Yeah, probably.
And Smith's Castle has let it be known that they don't want the investigators there to discuss anything to do with the conflicts, the battles, or Joshua Teft. That is to be left out and sort of whitewashed right now, which I found was kind of disturbing in a way because it's a major part of the history. The house was burned down and then rebuilt, and there were soldiers allegedly buried somewhere around the property. I mean, to just kind of discount that all of a sudden and not talk about it anymore seems very weird in 2023.
Yeah, especially with the whole movement today in history is to tell those narratives. It's the public historian needs to bring out stories of all aspects of life now, and it's interesting to take that focus out. Like, we don't talk about that. It's like, well, it happened. And these narratives should be told, so it was interesting.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre thing. I suppose I'm not shocked by it.
Yeah.
But I'm very surprised that, you know, it went to that, because I mean, it was certainly part of their history there. I want to play another clip for everybody. And this is actually Chris. This is the Assembly Theater clip. When you're walking backstage and he's being trailed by myself and Steve Mills, and there's nobody in the theater at this point. We're about to do a shoot there, and before anybody got set up, we're walking backstage, and someone greeted Chris in a very pleasant voice here, and this is self-explanatory, so I'm just going to go ahead and play it.
She already had it going, so wherever you want to sit. It works. Right? I want the cat ball to go off.
Cat ball? You brought the cat ball?
Yeah, it's what it's on. It's on the board.
He heard some little voice. Swear to God. Girl. Like,
yeah.
It's like that. And I walked over here. Yeah, I remember that. Clear as day, you could hear it.
Yeah.
That was a good one. I do have one. I was thinking of while you were talking about, like, ones that were memorable or ones that stuck out for me. Shelter Cove, and mainly because in New York in the Hudson Valley, because you allowed me to bring my metal detector to that one. I do enjoy my metal detector.
You do enjoy your metal detector. And so, you know, Chris will do this with permission of the owners, and sometimes he returns coins, brass buttons. Oliver House, you had wasn't a cannonball, was it? Or was it a musket ball?
It was a small shot, yeah. So it was like a cannonball, yeah. And musket ball, I found there. I found a lot. They let me have free reign for a few days down there.
Yeah, Houghton Mansion.
Yeah.
Houghton Mansion let you do their thing. So that was a lot of fun. Before we get on to questions here, let me ask you how important firsthand information is to you. You might have touched on this a little earlier. I mean, the interview process, because the way this usually works is somebody will contact me, and I'll get back to them, and I'll say, okay, tell me your story. I won't lead them in any direction, but they'll tell me their story. And then I will say, okay, Chris, I need research at this address. These are the claims, the Cliff Notes version without going into a 45-minute. They're seeing this. How important is that information to you? I know you don't discard it.
No,
but in terms of I'm going to get to work, how much does that even enter your mind?
I copy and paste it and put it in a different file. It comes up for two reasons. At the end, so my process is the same for every location. I'm going to pull the tax records. I'm going to go and look at the plat maps, and I'm going to start digging through my process. So no matter what location is, that process is the same. When I'm done, I take a look at your claims, and then I start to try to piece those into any of that history. So if I'm discovering in the claim, it says that they feel like 11-year-old girl is seen in the hallway. Well, let me go back to my research now. Is there someone in here that I can link that to? Right. If I hit a roadblock, I'll also go to those and say, okay, I really don't have any other avenues to go. Let me check with the claims. Are they claiming something on the property? Are they claiming something that they're seeing out the window? Are they claiming whatever they're claiming? Maybe that'll help me get in to my research some more. So I don't initially start with it. More important to me is pretty much who the current owner is, so I can start the chain of title.
Right.
But I'll go back to it. I definitely go back to it at the end to kind of piece all the information together. What did I find that'll help whoever make a connection to their personal story?
Yep. Well, there was a case in Fall River where the deed of ownership proved true because the individual who was, haunting them, I don't mean with air quotes, they were literally there, was a previous owner that nobody knew of. But then it's like, we were able to show the document. Is it this guy? And they're like, oh my God, he used to live in back of us and he'd take our UPS packages, and the guy died just recently.
Yeah.
Let's get to some questions and we'll come back.
What's that?
Okay, we have one from Shelley Cooper. Shelley asked, do you guys think that activity happens just due to past emotional energy?
That's emotional energy has to be present. So what better way to project energy outward is through some emotional experience, whether positive or negative, right? So if you have a room in the house where typically births are, you have a whole wide range of emotions going on. So I'd imagine that if we're going to say that that's going to imprint itself, those emotional moments are definitely going to amp that up, Yeah. Do I think it's necessary? I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I don't think it's just emotional energy. Although, a lot of times I suppose it is, someone's just attached to a location or has a message or something of that nature that they haven't passed on. I think many times, Shelley, it is some kind of emotional content or context why somebody may still be there, but maybe not in every case. Your friend Aaron Bush has a question. Chris, is there a subject matter or period in time that interests you the most? And is there a case that you are most proud of as it pertains to your research? Okay, so Aaron snuck two questions.
Yeah, come on, Aaron.
Actually, it was a question I was going to ask. The first one, do you have a favorite era that you like to research? And okay, what's your proudest moment in RISEUP? I guess.
That's a good one. But I'll start with the period of interest. I definitely, outside of RISEUP, I spend a lot of time looking at Revolution to Civil War era, the mid 1700s to the maybe the Gilded Age in that area, the birth of our country, but especially focused around the youth at that time. I'm a teacher. I teach 8th grade. I'm the crazy years. So I always am interested in the history of the education in kids. And I know when I was at Salve, I did a thesis paper on adolescent crime rates in the late 1800s in Newport, and it was great to look into the old police logs, and so that's my focus a lot of times. Favorite moment was favorite moment for RISEUP? Was that what it was? Or investigation?
The investigation you're proudest of.
So proudest research. If you watch episode 1 about my aunt, that research meant a lot because my family was pretty quiet about it, rightfully so. So I did a lot of that research and spent time going through the court records and stuff like that. So I felt very proud to bring that to my family. That stuck with me, and I actually have a lot of her letters and in my own little archive. So that was pretty big for me. For RISEUP, anytime I could give people justification for their claims, I think is always important. I'm trying to figure some big ones that stick out, but there's so many that just kind of,
I know,
little moments that
I mean, there are a bunch of just cases that we really can't talk about that happen in people's homes, that the things that we were able to bring back to them were just astonishing. I mean,
actually, I have one for Rondina. So Chris Rondina, sorry, just hit me. If please read his book, his first book. It's great. I did a lot of research for him in his first story. He came up to me one day. Actually, we were at Hawes's party, and Rondina was there, and he said, I was growing up, and when my first paranormal experience was this like 11-year-old Victorian gowned girl just showed themselves in my room. Is there any way you could help me just come to like a moment here with that story? Was I making it up? Was it a big deal? And, I researched his home, and I did find an 11-year-old girl who passed away in about the 1870s in that house, in that floor. So being able to connect that, I think that was awesome for him. He put it in his book, and it meant a lot to him. So anytime I can do that, that makes it worth it.
Right. Moving on to another question from David Fritz.
AI.
David Fritz, yeah, there's a name you haven't heard since the Cape, right?
I know.
Right. Okay. With the use of AI now, can any instruments be useful in presenting paranormal events?
So AI in paranormal events. AI is interesting. It's a big debate in history right now, like who owns AI. Like, how do you cite or source original content from AI? But I think in some way AI could lend our hand or help us out with interpreting evidence or filtering evidence with audio and pictures, clarifying pictures and stuff like that. I use AI a little bit when I colorize photos. I used to not have AI to colorize photos, and now I do, and it's made my life a heck of a lot easier. I have to touch it up, but I think there's a place for AI. What that is right now, I don't know. In the paranormal,
AI. My jury is out because I understand the applications that can be used for the greater good. But now it becomes too easy to just put fake things out there, with people saying them. And we're seeing elements of that right now. To me, in terms of the paranormal, I couldn't honestly tell you I can think of something that it's going to benefit. Maybe recreations. But I think that we also have to be very guarded now with this new thing coming out of people presenting it as something evidential. So,
Photoshop now has a thing called generative fill. So you can basically take any photo and just, so it'll automatically select a person, but then you can generatively fill the area with whatever you want. So you could put it anywhere. You could put a ghost in the background. The AI will do it for you. So I wasn't even thinking about the negative side of it, but again, the theatrics of the paranormal is.
I think we're gonna have to be vigilant about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adam W., which investigation was your favorite and why? This is another one of those questions, Chris. It's a good question, Adam, but it's
Adam's always commenting on stuff, by the way, Adam. I love you commenting on stuff, and I love having you around. My favorite location. God. Some of it has to do with those moments where, I can't explain it, because I am in for the paranormal, believe it or not. Smith's Castle and the door shutting a few times. We have it on camera once. I was giving a tour and one just totally slammed. I still can't explain that. The EVP from Fort Barton, even your EVP from the Mills there, the French. I mean, those moments, it's not so much the places, because every place to me that has a story, I love stories. I love that. But when I can add an experience, I think that's all the Hudson River Valley stuff. That was awesome because that was just fun.
I had a blast.
That was fun. So a lot of places.
Yeah, we kind of went into those dumb.
Yeah.
Not uninformed because you had done plenty of background, but we're in a different state, a different region, like blank canvases, totally open minds about stuff. And there's no better place to be than right there. I got another video, speaking of closing doors. This is Belcourt Castle.
Oh, that was
at about 3 a.m. one night when we had left and just let cameras run overnight. So look at the far end of the hall here. We can talk over this because those are models of the castle Mr. Tinney built right at the end of the hall. We see that little white dot. It's a door handle.
Yeah.
And then suddenly at 3 o'clock in the morning, good night, everyone.
This is why I locked up the building pretty quickly. I don't know why. I honestly like it had a weird feeling up there, and that was Donald's apartments, I guess you would call it, up in the top there. And I really do think there was something to do with Donald there, the caretaker. Because
I got one more question here before we bring George in. This is from Joe Frezza. What was one of the more active locations you've gone to, and did you get a feeling about the place before you went there? I don't know, Chris, you're kind of like me. We don't get the feelies. Right?
No, that's why I was always surprised about Belcourt. How I gotta shut those windows upstairs. I'm gonna go quick.
Yeah.
The feelies or like God, there was so many like. That's a tough one.
For sheer like consistency of weird things happening, I mean, Belcourt's up there.
Belcourt's up there.
The office building in Barrington.
Yeah, that was a good one.
That
was an odd one because it really shouldn't have.
It didn't fit the profile.
Even Fort Adams in a weird way, doing those tours and being stuck in the back there. There were some moments where I thought I saw stuff. It was kind of
Norton, Mass.
We're both tough ones to get to jump. So it's
Norton, Massachusetts, private residence.
Oh, that was a good one.
I mean, I'm just talking about pure consistency. It was rare that we didn't walk out with something.
Yeah.
One thing, but I don't know, favorite. I think of in terms of places we had fun at. I'm going to go back to Hudson Valley.
Yeah,
we just had fun, and they were so nice to us.
They were. It's great food over there. I'm a big foodie, so if I can get a good meal and some investigation and history.
Just so you know, the truth here, folks, was that we shot a documentary as a benefit for their film society, and they threw us an after party after the premiere, and we drank all the wine in the house.
Champagne.
Well,
we had to switch to wine after we drank all the champagne.
I want to bring George back in here before we say goodbye. But I got another question for you, Chris. Might be a tough one. Who can tell the story better? Someone who experienced it or somebody who researched it from all angles?
It's just funny because I had that question with a talk with Rondina about that. Like, who's the better storyteller? And sometimes I think my stories are limited by what's on my paper. I could tell a great story, even though my students say I talk too much. But
let's say you go to George's house and he tells you about things that have happened there over the last 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And then you research it. All right, because we know sometimes we have gaps in memory. We add things, subtract things. This is why I always tell people, write it down right away, write it down, document everything, because you're not trying to be deceptive, but you may forget or maybe add some things. So I guess that's where I'm coming from on this question.
Yeah.
To tell a story of a place, do you have to experience it, or is it just hard facts and data?
I think it's both. I mean, the hard facts and data should drive the narrative, but there's that personal side of living it and being there adds to that narrative. I think you need to identify it as like a personal story, or but if it connects and combines, I mean, that makes the perfect narrative and story. But I don't think either side can be left out. I mean, if you're watching the murder story, I think some of the most impactful parts of episode 2 is, his quotes about what he did, So that's like the sitting down and talking to him, and he's telling you what happened, that's the personal part of it. Then the pictures and the narrative around the facts of the story and all that stuff just add the clarity to the story, I think.
Well, George, you being somewhat of a true crime aficionado, and you like to watch those kind of things, this is why Chris's stories are right up your alley. And, it's something that I wouldn't say we shied away from on this channel at all, because there's some brutal things, but, we kind of find our niche and we sort of stay in our lane a little bit with the paranormal. But this is one of the things that I enjoy about the stories thus far. Chris has told where, it's that human element involved and that kind of darkness that, is a reality in our lives.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes because this field is so liquid in a sense, it's just, there's nothing really held down. It's on a belief and experience type of situation. You use that example. If Chris were to come down here and do research on this house and say there's never been any deaths, there's never been any cause for any activity to go on, and yet there is constant activity that's happening here, many, many experiences and claims, then you can't validate it. I guess it's in the same sense we talk about many times on this show. There are those who do not believe in the paranormal until they've had that experience. There are those, such as Chris, who've come in, do the investigation from a historical standpoint and say there's no claims here to validate a haunting, but could experience the haunting right there at that point in time. And in a sense, that becomes history itself, that experience for that individual. But it's got to be a little bit difficult, Chris, to do that crossover. Again, you went to the Hudson River. You're going out there to investigate. If you're combining whatever history that you looked up and researched on there, and that experience does not fall in line with the research you've done, it still kind of, in a sense, adds to that history, does it not?
Yeah. So, I mean, the absence of historic narratives doesn't mean there isn't going to be something there. I mean, I think that's a difficulty, like you said, at the crossover, right? So if I went to your house and said, "Hey, George, this is literally just built. There's nothing here," and yet we're getting paranormal activity, that, to me, that doesn't mean it doesn't align with something that I don't understand. And I'm willing to say that we don't understand what's going on. Can I help? Can I research? I can. But in your case, if there's nothing historically attached to it, well, maybe I got to do a better job of looking at, what happened on the property before your house. I don't know. Or let's look at all these different theories that people are throwing out there, all these different suggestions about maybe it's just someone attached to you or objects. I don't know. I'm willing to keep all of that into the narrative. It's just my focus when I do my end of it is the research. We'll let someone else handle the theories. We'll let someone else handle that. I'm not going to shut you down and say, nope, sorry, George, doesn't align to my research.
You know what the other end of that though is, George, and Chris. No, I'm a history nerd too. I mean, I don't have the resources that Chris does, was why, we're so dependent on him and grateful for what he does for the group overall. But I know myself, in looking to stuff, the door swings both ways. There are some very iconic and prominent, reputedly haunted places in this country, probably the world, that have nothing to do with the stories attached to them. And there's a lot of them. Right. The Winchester Mystery House, the Myrtle's Plantation, There was nobody at Myrtle's who was ever shot and crawled to the 12th step inside or would shot on the porch or anything like that. But yet these things have grown a life of their own. And some of it is due to commerce because it attracts visitors. And some have just been stories that tour guides will tell you too, Chris, that it drives them crazy when they may attend someone else's tour and they're just telling the same stories over and over again about events in history that never happened.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, realistically, what Chris is doing going to these locations is he's not researching the building, meaning the construction or the foundation, maybe the bedrock. But actually, he really is. He's investigating the people. He's researching those who came before, and those people were and are energy of some sort. And so, if they are still residing there for whatever reason, case in point, the Payne House is a perfect example of it, still living their lives on the other side, right as rain, regardless of the tragedies, everybody there is fine now. But it's, again, these are the stories that are researched are of the people, not necessarily just the materials that made the building. Correct, Chris?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're basically bringing up the theory of place, they call it. It's just a place is a place. It's a building. And if you're just going to research the building and the construction and all that, then you're not adding that narrative, that the story of the place. Until you add that, then there is no personal connection and history and all that. So, the focus, we're going to understand the construction of the location, but if we're going to bring the community in and we're going to teach this location, this place, we got to add that narrative, those people, what happened. And that's a movement in history right now, like the people that we don't typically talk about, the everyday people, the farmers, the seamstress and all that. So absolutely.
Gettysburg is a perfect example of that. If you're just looking at the land where it's beautiful, but you got trees and rocks and rolling hills, end of story. Then you add in the horrible tragedies of that location, and it just enhances it a billionfold. I mean, and some of the captures, the experiences that people have had there, certainly make it what it is today, the history that it is today. Speaking of history, though, one question I did have for you: is there a modern history that you would love to do research, whether it was a ship that's docked somewhere, whether it was a historical government building, or even a bar, nightclub, or stadium that you would really like to sink your teeth into and look at?
Let's see, a modern location.
The White House.
We're going modern with the White House? Yeah, I would love those. I mean, if you're talking
still active, I should say still active. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that would be a great place. I always think some of the over, I loved researching the Conjuring house. I would love to dive into all the other houses of the theatrical world of the paranormal, and really see what's going on in those places, because I already know the theatrical Hollywood story. I would love to dive back in. But yeah, I shout out to Rondina there. I did tell your story, by the way. You weren't on.
Yeah. You were acknowledged, Chris.
Yes.
So you know.
But all of those, the White House would be awesome. And a lot of actually has been research on the White House in the paranormal world.
What about overseas?
Overseas, oh God,
Buckingham Palace.
Oh, wouldn't that be great? Versailles would be one up in my list there. A lot of the cathedrals over there are amazing. I spent like a month and a half in Romania doing archaeology, and some of those villages had some great structures that were from almost the Roman times. I would love to dig my teeth into those, but again, those would be really hard to research because there really isn't any documents or anything from it, but there's a lot of archaeology over there, which I think is a site to start to add. I would love to. Trying to convince the Conjuring House to let me do some archaeology over there, but material culture, I think, is something to add to this conversation. That's at a later time, maybe one of my episodes.
See, you're not, as a historian, you're not as encumbered as an investigator. When I ask this question, are there places that you care not to investigate? And I would say for me, there are certain, well, Gettysburg would be one, but you can't investigate the battlefield anyway. So, but places like that, people in Rhode Island, the infamous station fire.
Yeah, I would say
I don't have any interest in it. I mean, you're not encumbered by that as a historian, because if we said, I want you to investigate this dramatic battle on these grounds, that's fine, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to charge in there if you don't really see any value.
No, especially recent memory tragedies, tragedies within recent memory. I mean, that's a no-go, memorials, stuff like that.
Yeah, we see a lot of that where people who, he shall go unnamed because I don't want to give many attention, but spirit box sessions of people who died within a day. I mean, he's infamous for that in this field, and much put upon, deservedly so. But I don't know if you're just giving him more attention, so he'll go unnamed. But things like that, there's a line with everybody, is I guess what I'm saying. Is that kind of yours?
Oh yeah, any recent memory tragedy, memorials, things that really had an impact on the people. Now, I don't see how it advances the field, because there's plenty of other locations. If it's done with family request, I still think I would step away. There's no need to.
Yeah, a little different scenario.
Yeah, like you wouldn't go to the September 11th memorial and start doing an investigation down there. Do I think people would if invited? Probably, but I would step away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, we got just about a minute here. Can you give a little bit of a teaser in the upcoming episodes on Tuesday nights right here on Dead or Full Spectrum, the Paranormal Preservationist? What can they expect? And just little teasers.
So I have a few in mind. So the next one, I do want to kind of maybe cover some of the Middleborough Town Hall and a location that deals with a psychic impression versus my historic research. So it's kind of like the two worlds and how they work together. I do want to do the Conjuring House. I want to approach it in a certain way that makes people perhaps think about the identity of the location itself, like how it presents itself. I have the Connecticut, some great tales coming out of that town there. I got so many folders full of research that I want to dive into, but I want to make sure it's not just storytelling, that there's a question behind it that kind of guides you either at the beginning or at the end to think about, should we be doing this, or is this something important to keep in mind?
And remember this:
stories people will laugh at, and they'll feel guilty for laughing at them. But please don't feel guilty.
No.
And remember that, Chris, as a teacher, there will be a test after each episode. So keep that in mind too, ladies and gentlemen. That's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank Chris for joining us this evening. We have now kicked off our holiday time frame. That's right. We're in October now, guys. So definitely please keep hitting that reminder bell and also the thumbs up before you guys log off for tonight. And we'll see you back here next week. But this coming Tuesday, check out the next episode with Chris Blanchette, Paranormal Preservationist. This has been Dead Air Live on the Dead Air Full Spectrum channel. On behalf of Ken DaCosta, you guys have a great night. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.